Good afternoon. We're solving a set of 40 questions. I've purposely selected questions that are a bit harder than usual. Those are the ones that will trick students, drop grades. So the questions here are slightly harder than most questions in paper 2, but that's the whole purpose of these sessions. They are meant to train you for the harder ones so you could not drop grades, so you can get higher grades in your exam. So I will start with a bit direct question, but the concept here is very, very repetitive. They just change the name of the animal and then they refer to the number of chromosomes. For instance, here they said there's an alligator. It has 32 chromosomes in each of his body cells, like nose is a body cell. And then they said, like, in the zygote, how many chromosomes you would expect to have. Now, the rule is super simple when it comes to number of chromosomes. Number of chromosomes is always the same in every body cell except the gamete, except the sperms and eggs. Those will have half the number of chromosomes. But zygote, any other cell, is going to be the same as the total number of chromosomes. Next is one of those inheritance questions. They said red-green color blindness is a sex-linked characteristic caused by a recessive allele. There is a woman who's colorblind, and there's a man who has color vision. Now, when it comes to sex-linked disorders, those tend to have something like this. There's always 2 X chromosomes when it comes to the lady, and there's 1 X chromosome for the man. Now, since it's sex-linked, then these characteristics here, there will be like here on the X chromosome. For instance, if she's a carrier, she will be like this. If he's colorblind, he would be like this. Usually men only have 1 chance for such characteristics. So he could either be healthy or colorblind. Ladies can be homozygous dominant, she still sees colors. She could be carrier, she still sees colors. The only chance for her not to, or to be colorblind, is to be homozygous recessive. In my case, they said that the man is normal vision. So the chromosomes of the man is going to be like this, XB capital and Y. And for the lady, she is colorblind. So she is like this. Okay? Now, they want me to figure out what is it going to be like for their children. So one option is a girl, it's like this. Another option is a boy, like this. Obviously, you're not going to do all of this in your exam. It takes time. Show you now in a moment how do you solve these in much shorter time. Okay? So what can we conclude out of this? We can now tell that if the father has healthy allele for color vision or hemophilia or any sex-linked disorder, his girls, the female offspring, the daughters, we like to call them, they'll be healthy. On the other hand, if the mom has the disorder, then the boys are the ones who are going to be affected. So learn this rule. It's very helpful to predict in much faster time than spending a few minutes trying to solve. When it comes to genetic disorder, the sex-linked disorders, the girls receive their X from the dad and the mom. In other words, if the dad is healthy, there's no chance for his daughters to have any disorder. Okay? Dad only has 1 X chromosome. On the other hand, if the mom has a disorder, if the mom is colorblind, the mom has a lower case for any disorder, then the boys are likely to have this disease. So in my case here, I am gonna go for this. Boys will be colorblind, girls will have color vision, just because it was the dad who's healthy this time, and his girls will be healthy. But the boys, they will inherit those X chromosomes from their mom. Now, usually when you see them writing pure breeding is another way of saying that's homozygous. So pure breeding, that's homozygous for some trait. Here I have rats, and they did not tell me what is dominant, what is recessive, but it's easy to tell that. Look what they said. They said, we have some white rats and we have black rats, but when they bred together, all the offspring were black. So that's like the family here. Black and white, all the offspring were black. What does that tell you about dominance here? It tells you that black is the dominant. Okay? So they took one of those baby rats and they bred it with white rat. So they want me to find the outcome from this offspring. So first of all, when I have BB, again, they said all offspring are black. So that tells me here that the dominant here is black. So the white has to be B small. And the offspring here has to be B capital, B small. You may tell me, like, why doesn't that male or female here, why doesn't it have, for instance, B capital, B small? I tell you, it can't be B capital, B small here, because if it was B capital, B small, then we would have had some offspring white. But the question clearly says here what? It says all are black. So that's the conclusion. Then this guy must be B capital, B capital. And the offspring must be B capital, B small. Now, if you breed this with white, what would you expect the offspring to be? So usually heterozygous times pure recessive or homozygous recessive, you will end up with 50, 50. All right? So learn those 3 rules by heart. It saves you a lot of time in the exam. Hetero times pure recessive gives you 50-50. If one of the parents is homozygous dominant, then you will have 0 chance of having anything different. So again, first rule was like this. Learn it. Saves you a lot of time. So if one of them is like this, and the other one is pure recessive, you're going to get 50% of the dominant. If one was like pure dominant, then you will have 100% of the offspring will be dominant, no matter what you have for the other parent. The last rule, and I call this the golden rule, is like this. If one parent is heterozygous and the other parent is heterozygous, then there is 25% chance of having a different trait. What does that mean? I mean, if this guy was brown eyes, humans brown eyes is dominant trait. Blue eyes usually is recessive. So if you've had this, there's 75% to get the dominant, the brown eyes, and 25% of having blue eyes. In other words, if you've seen parents that have different trait than their children, then it's probably this golden rule. So learn those 3. You can apply them fast because nobody wants you to write any conclusion or any explanation. You just need to figure out the answer much faster. Yeah, going back to the rats, what am I expected to write? As I said, since it's hetero times pure recessive, then I'm expected to get 50% to be black, 50% to be white. Good. Next, it's one of those pedigrees about blood groups. And they said, what is the genotype of this mom here? Priya, it's her name. So how am I supposed to figure out her genotype? You really need to check her children and grandchildren in this case. First of all, one of her children is blood group B, all right? And her husband is blood group A. And if you go down to the grandchildren, you realize that there is blood group O, right? So an A. So I would start from here because that's much easier. Take a look. Father is blood group O. His daughter here is blood group O. In humans, blood group O is recessive. I mean, if your blood group is O, that means what? That means your genotype has to be pure recessive, like this. If your blood group is AB, still you can easily predict because those A and B are equally dominant. On the other hand, if your blood group is A, here you can be homozygous dominant AA or heterozygous. And if your blood group is B, it's the same case. Okay? So in my case here, we've seen that the child here, the granddaughter's blood group is O, right? You cannot be here AA. You know why? Because this daughter wouldn't exist. So this here has to be blood group AO, all right? So that we could pass this A here, we can have an OO in this daughter. What about Priya? Because that's what this question is all about. It has to be having blood group B. Why? Because this son here is blood group B. And it can't be BB because we wouldn't have had this daughter here, right? So in this case, she has to be BO. All right, why again? Because there is B to start with, and there is no chance of her to be BB because otherwise we wouldn't have had any of these offspring there. So I'll go for option C. Okay, so again, if you're in a hurry in the exam, first thing you would eliminate is obviously this because of the blood group B. You really have to have a B, and you cannot have a BB because that will eliminate this option of this daughter. Here it's talking about some sex-linked disorder. Again, when it's sex-linked disorder, this means the males they only have one copy of this, whatever the trait is. Okay, so you see here, that's a Y chromosome, that's his X chromosome. The mom is heterozygous. So they're saying, what are the chances that the daughter will show this condition? Again, this condition is recessive. The father is having this trait, and the mom is heterozygous. So how am I supposed to figure it out? So daughter, so I'm gonna just write it up here. So we have A for the mom. So mom is XA, XA small, taken from here. And the dad is, there is XA small and Y. Okay, and I'm only concerned here about the girls, the daughters. So that's the first daughter here, and you can see she's carrier, but she doesn't have the disease. Carrier having one copy of this trait here is enough to make her healthy. That's a girl here, and you can see she has day disorder because she has inherited both from her mom and her dad. So out of the girls, only the girls, what is the chance of having this disorder? It's 1 out of 2, right? 1 out of 2 is like 50-50. So I'm gonna go for this. Okay? So the reason why I wrote those X and Y, simply because they said it here, sex-linked. Still about inheritance. So there's a man that has hemophilia. Hemophilia is another sex-linked disorder. They said it here. And there is a son who has inherited this disease. So the son has the disease, and there are 2 more sons who do not have the disease. Now the question is asking me, the man's wife is pregnant. If the baby is a girl, where is the chance that she will have that disease? Right? So once again, I have a man that has the disease. How do you write a man that has such a disorder? I'm just gonna use H for hemophilia. So the man is gonna be like this. All right, recessive and only on the X chromosome. Now, I'm wondering about the wife, because it says here that the boys, some had and some did not have the disease. Okay? So in other words, some of those boys here have like H and some did not have, so it's like that. All right? So what does that tell you about the wife? It tells you here that the wife is a carrier. She has the recessive, but she has also the dominant. Okay? So now we worked out the mom. Now it's easy because I can tell where is the daughter is going to be like. So let's take a look at the daughters here. So one is like this. Good. And one is going to be like that. In other words, half the girls have the disease, the other half don't have it. So once again, the answer here is going to be C. Right? So again, the way I worked it out, it's like I worked in reverse. I wrote the offspring of the children because I was given the children here, the boys. And from there, I figured out that half of them have it, the other half don't have it. So I worked out the genotype of the mom. You get usually one of those inheritance questions in the exam. But again, if you're aiming to get high grade, you really need to get it right. Okay? I still have a few more of them just to make sure you get it right. Number 7, it's about breathing. I've seen this question so many times. They give you graphs. It looks difficult, but it's super easy. Look, this said, at what point on this graph is the guy's diaphragm, this muscle here, is contracting? Now, quick question. When does your diaphragm contract? Is it when you're breathing in or when you're breathing out? You may cheat this in the exam. Actually, you can feel it. It contracts when you're breathing in, okay? So in other words, this is breathing in. Okay? Which means what? As you breathe, someone is breathing in. What happens to the volume of his chest? Try it, all right? There's no rule against you breathing in the exam. So you breathe in, the volume of your chest increases, right? As the volume increases in any object, what happens to its pressure? Pressure decreases. So breathing in, diaphragm here contracts, the volume increases and the pressure decreases. So basically, I need to check the diaphragm to see when does that happen. So they said at which point the muscles of the diaphragm start to contract. So I need initial increase in volume, initial decrease in pressure. So where do you see this? I can see it here, right? So that's the blue is the volume, start to increase, and the pressure is just about to decrease. Okay? If they've changed it, if they reversed it, then you do the opposite. Again, if they said this, the diaphragm is start to relax or becoming flat, then that becoming dome shaped, I should say, that's breathing out, and you reverse the options. Inheritance, there's this diagram, and it's about tasting in humans. So the ability to taste is dominant. To be non-tasters, if you can't taste things, can't taste food, that's recessive. So they said here, which statement about the genotypes of sister Mary, where is Mary, here is Mary, and Jean. Now, those two are tasters, meaning they have to have the dominant allele. Agreed? Because they said it. To be able to taste, that's dominant. But they cannot be B capital, B capital. You know why? Because they got children who are showing the recessive trait. All right? So again, the rule is super easy. If you've seen somebody and he has a child who's different than her genotype, then they must have a recessive trait. In other words, if you've seen some guy whose eyes are brown and he has a child whose eyes are blue, then the father, the one you can see, is heterozygous, right? Or another one, that's the golden rule of inheritance. If parents are like this, brown-eyed, and the child is blue-eyed, then the parents must be heterozygous. So me here, for both of those parents, I'll be picking that they're both heterozygous for that reason. This question is about the eye, and again, those graph questions tend to be intimidating, but it's super easy. If you just realize what they want. They want you to find where is the optic nerve. Now, what is the optic nerve? The optic nerve is what links your eye with your brain. And it's there at the back of your eye. So that's the eye here. That's where the optic nerve is. And it happens that the optic nerve is that region of the eye that has no light receptors. Because the point where this enters has to be empty so that we can link up all of these receptors, rods and cones to that optic nerve. So for that reason, on this graph, if I want to point at the optic nerve, it has to be this area that has no receptors, no rods, no cones. If that same question comes again and it was for fovea, fovea is the part of the eye that is richest with cones. That's the part of your eye that gives you the best vision. It's here. And on the graph, it has to be the peak of the cones here. So it would have been A, but it's not here. This question here, really important. It's always asking about blood groups. You have fathers A, mothers B, or the other way around, don't know. What are the possible blood groups of their next child? They said possible. So what could be a possibility if mom is A and father is B? Remember, blood group A and B are co-dominant. They're equally dominant. And A could be O or BO, right? That's possible because the question just wants you to find what are the possible genotypes. So in that case, the child could have any blood group possible, right? So it can be AB, can be B, can be A, and it can be O. For that reason, I will pick all possible outcomes here, right? So it could be any different blood group. So once again, learn it. Easy fact. If parents are A and B, then the child could have any possible blood group. Okay? Even this picture, they always ask you that same question. How long is the small intestine? If you could just point at its start and its end, it's easy. So where does the small intestine start from? That's the esophagus, ignore. This region here is part of the stomach, ignore. So start from here, right? And where it ends, that's the large one. The wider intestine is the large one. So we don't want this one. So it starts at 1, ends at 7. 7 minus 1 is 6. Now, for some reason, students get this question wrong. That's why I picked it. They said if you're doing a conservation problem, means if you're trying to save a species, conservation, which one of these is not the reason behind conservation? Meaning, which one of these is not a way to save a species? First, introducing a new species, maintaining the resources like food and shelter, protecting vulnerable environment, meaning you save a forest or something, and reducing extinction, preventing it from being wiped out. So which one of these is not the reason that you be concerned and start conserving an animal species? It is, guess which one? A, right? Why is it A? Because the worst case scenario of saving any species is to introduce a new species. Like, told you this story before. In Australia, there were no rabbits. Somebody introduced rabbits into this continent for the first time. He was interested in hunting. And a few years later, the entire place was covered with this animal species. So introducing a new species into new habitat, it's not right. It's not something you would do for any habitat, because the new species will go out of control. Next, it's the carbon cycle. It says here, which diagram represents the flow of carbon in ecosystems? So which one of these, it's not like a normal textbook carbon cycle. So which one of these looks to you like the actual carbon cycle? Look, in the carbon cycle, there are two essential things. Once you find them in the diagram, then you get it right. First, you need an arrow from plants and to plants. What does that mean? Plants absorb carbon dioxide. It's the only thing that absorbs CO2, photosynthesis, and it gives off carbon dioxide as well. So I need that diagram where I see this. I see a plant absorbing carbon dioxide. So B is not, right? And C doesn't have it. And D has absorption, but apparently in D, plants are not respiring. So that's what makes D wrong, right? So plants absorb and release. Plants respire and do photosynthesis. Question 14 looks as if it needs any calculation, but it does not. It says, which trophic level contains herbivores? I have the biomass. Of those living things, and I want to find out the herbivore. Now, this fact is quite important. What does that fact say? It says that the biomass in the food chain decreases gradually, like this. So, pyramid of biomass is always upright like this. Why is it so? Because the amount of energy in the producer is the greatest, and it decreases slowly, right? You know that rule that energy is continuously lost along the food chain. And for that reason, the biomass of the tree is going to be that much. right? The biomass of the herbivore will be the second highest, all right? Next time they ask you for secondary consumer, you would pick this. Tertiary consumer would be that, right? So it's super easy. Biomass decreases gradually. And the pyramid, that's another thing they ask you about. The pyramid of biomass always looks like the one I have here. It's never like upside down or inverted, not like pyramids of number. Number 15. They gave you series of numbers and they said what percentage of energy present in the producer is transferred to the secondary consumer. So how much energy I have there in the secondary consumer? First of all, which one is the secondary consumer? If this is a plant, how do I know? They said photosynthesis. So this is the plant producer. Primary consumer, I'm not interested. I need the second, so I need this guy here. And the question is asking me how much percentage here was available in the plant. So what am I supposed to do? As if I'm finding the percentage of 400 from 40,000, this number. Percent means you multiply by 100. So it's going to be 1%. Yeah, this one. So just find the percentage from this, from the initial total. This question also quite easy. Another variation of those questions where they ask you to determine percentage, energy, etc. So what is this about? They said, how much energy does the bird receive here? Okay, so how are you supposed to, I mean, what is the amount of energy on this arrow? So the amount of energy in the food chain can be easily calculated if you know the input and the output. So this is the energy lost. That's the energy lost here. And that's the input. So if the input is 240 and the amount of energy lost is that much, 120, 70. So 240 minus 120 and 70 gives me the amount of energy that's been supplied to the bird. So let's do it here. 240 minus 120 and 70. That's a 50. This one here has a small piece of information. Again, it's quite common. You see those zigzag curves? When I see them, I know this is about predator-prey. It's always like this. They may give you an example of a predator-prey that you're not familiar with, but when you see something like this, this is typical for fox, squirrel, cat, mouse, whatever you like to call them. But how you're supposed to tell which one is the predator and which one is the prey? By default, the rule says that the predator has to be in less number and less mass than the prey. So whether it's numbers they're counting or whether it's mass, usually, I mean, in reality, in nature, it's not always the case, but for us, it's always that the predator has to be less than the prey because the predator gets his energy from the prey. Okay, so for me here, I can tell that this is the prey and this is the predator because of their numbers. And they follow each other. I mean, if the number of mice increases, then the cats will follow. But then when the cats increase, what's going to happen to the mice? Decreases. So that's why we have this zigzag. So the question says, which one decreases in predator? So I know that predator, and the decrease is going to be this. Next, it's about tertiary consumer. They want you here to count how many tertiary consumers you have in this food web. And I've tried this several times with students. They keep getting it wrong. So let's see how many you can count it. I'll do it along with you. So I need tertiary consumer. So I'm going to highlight food chains and I count how many I can get. So you'll always have to start from the plant. So this is always my primary consumer. Phytoplankton is the plant. How do I know it's the plant? I know it's a plant because it's the one that captures the sunlight. So this is a plant. Doesn't count here. So I need primary consumer. So the first one I can think of is this way as a tertiary consumer. Primary, secondary, and tertiary. That's one. So this is number one. Let's count another one. Try blue. Primary, then secondary. Here, so primary, secondary, and tertiary is two. Okay, now let's try three. I could go this way. Primary, secondary, and tertiary. Let's do it in black. That's third. Do still have more? Yeah, I do, right? So I could also go that way. Primary, secondary, and tertiary. So this way. Primary, secondary, and tertiary. And the last one I have is in this direction. Let me show you. I'll put it in yellow maybe. Okay. So primary, secondary, and tertiary. So this guy here is my last option. So total, how many did I have? I have one. There is two. That's three. There's four. And the squid is five. So just walk along the food chain. It takes some time. And see all possible outcomes of this thing. So I'm going to go for 5 in total. Also, this has been asked so many times, especially in older exam papers. They ask you, where does the sewage enter the river? This is like eutrophication, but how are you meant to tell? First of all, when you drop sewage fertilizes any pollutant that has nitrogen into water supply, what it does is eventually it will drop the oxygen concentration. If you remember eutrophication, fish die because oxygen runs out. So in my case, I need to point at the point where oxygen decreases. So where does the oxygen start to decrease? Because that's where the sewage enters. So it has to be here, right? Whenever the oxygen starts to decrease. Here is recovering. Here we have more oxygen. This question here is about tropisms, auxins. So you have been given this diagram. What is this about? This is about shoot, root, and they've taken something like the one I have here. And look what they've done to the plant. They put the plant sideways, okay? Now, when you put the plant sideways in the dark, suddenly you see that the shoot starts to point upwards. Do you know what makes it grow upwards like this? Reason here is that this side has more auxins than this side. Simply because gravity pulls the auxins down. Take any object, you put it sideways. You have a water bottle. You put the water bottle sideways, the water drops down. Same idea here, right? Now they're asking me here, what can be concluded from this experiment about the auxins in the seedlings? First one, high concentration of auxins stimulates cell elongation on the lower side of the root. Here, no, right? You know why? Because if this was true, then the roots would have grown upwards, right? Again, auxins make the plant grow faster. So I'm expecting auxins here to be here, right? Then if this was true, the first line is true, then we would have had the roots growing upwards, but that did not happen. The other one is correct. It's the shoot that has more auxins to the bottom side, and that's why it's bending upwards. As always, even if it was like about light, not about gravity like the one I have here, even if it was about light, the bending always occurs on to the side that has less auxins. So if I had a shoot and I have light here, then the bending is going to grow that way. Going to grow to the light. But why? Because this shaded side will have more auxins. For 21, it says, what is happening at X? This type of graph, it comes in the context of mitosis. I mean, it's here. And they ask you, like, what happens here? Now, if a cell is to divide by mitosis, it does like this. You need to start with certain number of chromosomes, and you need to end up with two identical cells, just like the parents. I'm just gonna color code them so you can track them. Okay, so one like this, one like that. So these are identical to the ones I've started with. But halfway in the middle, what is supposed to happen? How am I supposed to start with a cell that has two chromosomes and I end up with total of 4 chromosomes? The secret is here. The secret is in this step. Halfway in the middle, before the cell decides to duplicate, look what happens. Each chromosome has to copy itself. So each chromosome becomes literally 2 copies like that. All right? So that we can end up with identical cells in the end. 2 identical cells at the end. See what they said here? They said per cell. So identical to the one I started with. So what am I supposed to pick for this option? I say DNA replication occurs. So again, please keep this in mind. Mitosis, meiosis, the number of chromosomes in the offspring, in the daughter cells, is double the parent. And whenever this cell division to happen, you really need to double the DNA before you go forward. How is this graph going to look like if this question came for meiosis? It would have looked like this. So it would have half the amount of DNA as that parent. It's going to look like this. This is the population growth curve, the log stationary death. And they said which statements are correct. So, first one. During that log exponential growth, the birth rate is higher than death rate. Right? Makes sense because they're increasing. So the first line is true. Second one, at X there is no deaths and the population is limited by lack of food. First of all, there's always death. We always say death rate is greater than, we always say birth rate is greater than death, right? Which means that there are deaths, but the number of births is greater. But I don't have any limitation here, right? So that's why I'm expecting them to have faster growth. What about Y? Y is stationary. You know why we call it stationary? Because there's no net increase in the number of population, and births and deaths are equal. So the only correct statements here are these two, 1 and 3. We have a question about inheritance. It says black furs dominant. Okay, so B, black is the dominant. Okay, and you have whites. Do they have white or gray? Yeah, white is recessive. That's white. There is a test cross to determine the genotype of some pigs. If this black fur. So remember what a test cross is about. Test cross is like this. Test cross is you are trying to determine the genotype of the parent. So if this guy is B capital, you get 100%. They're all its color. And if it's B capital, B small, then you get 50-50. That's the whole point of a test, to tell the genotype of the parent. Because if somebody shows a dominant trait, if somebody is brown-eyed, then you won't be able to tell his genotype because it's not visible. You have to see his children. So the same idea here. We breed and then we figure out the genotype. So let's check. What would be expected if the results if the pig was homozygous? So I mean, if his parent is B capital, the rule says no matter what the genotype of the other parent, all the offspring, 100%, they'll be black. Okay? If it was heterozygous, I would have picked option A. Next question is about deforestation, and it said here, what effect does removing rainforest have on the environment? Okay, see how I've straight away jumped to that line because it's more than enough to understand what the question needs. So, decrease in the runoff into rivers and flooding. You have to think of deforestation as something bad. We all have to agree, right? So you don't expect anything good to happen. So flooding is likely to happen. Improved soil structure and soil nutrients, that's not likely to happen. They said decrease here, so you don't expect that to happen, obviously. Reduce soil erosion, it's not likely to have it because, again, deforestation is expected to damage the environment. And reduced biodiversity, that's the correct one. So once again, with deforestation, you cut down the trees, obviously. And as you cut down the trees, you end up with more water in the soil because the trees are no longer sucking the water. And you expect the soil and the water to drift into the rivers and lakes. That's what causes the flooding. What does the last line mean? It means that the species lose their habitat and they decrease. They're likely to become extinct. Now, you either spend 5 minutes looking at the data in the table or you take an easy shortcut here. A lot of numbers, a whole calendar is being given to you, but the question is simple. Which two weeds are best adapted to survive somebody is mowing the grass? Somebody does like this, okay? So, easy. Look. You have 4 of those species, and they've started to cut down the grass sometime in August here. So which species are the best? They don't decrease or they don't die completely after this process. Is the ones that remain in the end, the ones that have large number at the end. So it's this and this. So it's C. Now, what does that graph remind you of when you see zigzags in the graph? This is typical for predator prey. In my case, it's like a herbivore and a plant. So whatever eats another is always going to follow each other in the trend. If you have a cat and mouse, the cat increase, the mouse decrease, and it keeps fluctuating like this. So that's the same idea. They gave me a conclusion here, and they want you, listen to this one, they want you to find which description fits this statement. So usually those questions don't require any textbook knowledge. They just want you to apply an idea here and see which one of those statements at the bottom basically aligns with this idea I have here. So it says population change in animal plankton, which is this one here, after similar changes in plant plankton because the animals eat the plant. So this increases, this follows it afterwards. So what is the description that fits that? So let's say it is possible interpretation of the data. The data do not support the statement. The data are too random to be interpreted. It is the only way to interpret the data. So which one you would pick if you're in an exam, for instance? Think about it. First of all, in science, we hate those extreme words, right? I would never, if I am saying a statement during the lesson, I try my best not to use always, not to use only. You know why? Because those extreme words don't apply for it. You can't generalize things like the way we do in life. In science is not. Okay? I'm not giving you hints here, but the reason here, the data does not support the statement. It does, right? Because whenever the plants increase, the animals increase afterwards. And it's not random because this is quite predictable. The increase in the plants is followed by increase in the animals, like sheep and grass. You have more sheep, you have more grass. And the last one here, it's not the only interpretation because we don't know about other factors. We don't know about the seasons, the sun, the other food available, right? So A is the best one. Again, what would you learn out from this question? You learn the extreme words are usually put in the wrong options. Not always, but it's helpful to predict the answer. Okay? Number 7, it says which is the possible disadvantage of introducing new crop plants that has been genetically modified. Now, genetic modification has a lot of good things. It gives me higher yield. It makes the plant resistant to pests, weather conditions. But here they just want me to find something wrong or something bad about it. So let's read. Loss of weeds reduces competition. But that's a good thing, right? Because we want to kill the weeds, right? We usually do the genetic modification to get rid of those weeds. Some weeds might become resistant to the herbicide. What does that line mean? It means like if I genetically modify this plant here, those genes are likely to spread in the wild. So if I made this plant resistant to my spray, my herbicide, that same gene could be spread in the wild. How does it spread? The DNA doesn't jump by itself. It's usually done through insects. insects pollinate and drop their pollens randomly. So the genes could be mistakenly transferred in the environment. And that's one of the worst things about genetic modification, because you engineer a plant and then those genes spread to other plants. Okay, so I'm gonna go for B. Okay, and again, I'm looking for disadvantages, so I'm gonna ignore all options that refer to good stuff. Here it says which energy transfers are shown by the labeled arrow. Try to learn this rule. Again, it's very helpful. Look, in any food chain, the energy that is received by the producer, was the input of energy to the whole food chain, is light. Okay? What is the form of energy that's transferred from one organism to another? For instance, if I have like corn and chicken, what does the arrow here represent? The arrow, this one here, represents chemical. Food is chemical. And what do these arrows that point out of the food chain like this, what do these represent? This is loss of energy, and most of that energy is lost as heat. Okay, so learn those three. Chemical between, input is light, and lost is heat. Okay, so going back here, they want me to point at these arrows. Again, those arrows here represent food. No, not this one, and this one. Chemical. This one is light, and the lost energy is always heat. So it's this one. Right here, I have a list of activities that happens in a forest. Which activities are likely to ensure sustainability? What does sustainable mean? Sustainable means you use a resource like wood to make paper, and I try my best not to overuse it, not to make it run out. That's what's sustainable. A sustainable resource that is generated as you use it. So check these options here, and which of these are likely to make that plant wood sustainable. First one, it says cutting down only selected trees. If I had a forest and I cut down this tree here, that's normal, right? That's sustainable because these other trees will have time to grow. Education is the number one way to save any resource, right? People become more aware. Replanting trees. Okay. Cutting down trees to grow cropland, that's wrong, right? Turning a forest to a farm is one of the worst decisions because the forest will disappear and the farm is not going to last for too long. Next, it says, which statements are correct? Energy cannot be recycled in food webs. Producers make their own organic nutrients. The sun is the principal source of energy. Check the first one. What does that mean when I say energy is not recyclable? It means that when you start a food chain, let's say the sun, the plant, right, then you have, let's say, animal here. I don't know how to draw any animal. Maybe a rabbit. Okay, that's a mouse, turned out to be. So, energy cannot be recycled. That's 100% true because the amount of energy that enters will be lost as energy to the environment. Okay? Second one, plants make their own food. That's photosynthesis, to turn light energy into glucose, which is organic matter. That's also good. And the sun is the only supply of energy for our entire planet. We all rely directly or indirectly on the sun. So they're all good stuff. Next, it says, what is most likely to cause the decrease in the number of producers? So you need somehow to figure out which line is the producer. I would strongly recommend that you trace it on the exam papers. Mine here is producers. So it's this one here, okay? It's the dotted, small dotted line like this. And they want me there to find out what causes their decrease during April and May. So somewhere here. So somehow you need to think of it that way. Produces plants. What would decrease the amount of plants? It could be either that there is less light, but the graph here clearly shows there is more light. Okay, so that's not the option. Probably could be like the temperature is dropping, becoming unfavorable, but again, it's getting warmer near the summer, right? The only thing that could make those plants decrease is that the herbivores are increasing. The primary consumer means herbivore. Those are eating more of those plants, and that's what's making them decrease. So check the herbivores, which is this line here shown in pink. They are increasing, and as they increase, they eat more and more of those plants. Okay? For 32, what is the total biomass of all primary consumers in the food web? So you can see here, I was given the number of animals. That's primary consumer because they eat the plant. And I want to find their total biomass. So this is their number, 3,500, 150. And this is the mass of their individual animal here. So how am I supposed to work it out? I'll do it here. I'll do 150 squirrels, and each squirrel is 400 grams. How many of those shrews do I have? I have 3,500 times 20. So add up these now. You get the biggest number here. Yeah, 130,000. This upcoming question is super important. They repeat it so often. They say, what is the pathway taken by blood in fish? So that single circulation, it always has the gills, it has a heart, and the heart is atrium ventricle, just, and the blood exits the ventricle, the oxygenated go through the gills, and returns back to the heart. So, which one describes that route? You need to remember that route. Heart, gills, body, heart, just. So, which one is the correct description? Heart, gills, body, yes, the same. How do you tell the atrium ventricle? Always the atrium receives, the ventricle pumps the blood. This is one of those questions where you don't need to have any prior knowledge. You get the answer from the question. It says, which statement could explain the change in the number of patients of HIV? So you can see here in 1990, a lot of them. and then they've decreased drastically in 2021. So what could have caused this? You know, like HIV is a sex transmitted infection, STI, which means any measurement that will reduce the spread of HIV will decrease the number. So I need just to pick options where it shows those measurements to stop the spreading of HIV. So first one says condoms, which prevent transmission, increased in price. That doesn't make sense, right? If some item increases in price, then people will buy less of it. So the first word could tempt students to pick, but they have to realize that that's a decrease in the use of those condoms. B says people had more sexual partners, but that's something will increase the infection because they are more likely to spread the disease. C is correct because testing of blood is one of the measurements you do. So this is one of the things you would do because I want to make sure that the blood, before it's been given to a patient, it has to be sterilized, has to be clean, no infections in it. For this one says, what is the pyramid of biomass for this food chain? One super important fact about pyramids of biomass or pyramids of energy is that they're always pyramids. Okay? So every pyramid of biomass or energy will look like this. Reason? Because the amount of energy decreases in the food chain. The amount of mass or biomass decreases gradually. Not like pyramids of number. So straight away, in a matter of seconds, you can pick it's gonna have to be this one. Okay? So pyramid of number could be upside down, inverted, but never pyramids of biomass. Here it says, which food chain is represented by this pyramid of number? How are you meant to tell? Usually in any food or any pyramid of number, the size of the block in the pyramid is inversely proportional to the size of the animal. I mean, if the animals are tiny, then the block is big. Because if you have insects, you have just a small animal, their number tend to be larger than the larger animals. In other words, check my pyramids of number here. Which block has the largest size here? It's always the one of the smaller animals. Because a lot of insects will weigh more than like the bird I have here. So for that reason, I need somehow to find a block, to find a food chain where it ends with small animals. Because you see the biggest block in that pyramid of number is the top one, the last one. Okay? So check which one of those food chains has small animals at the end. You can find it, right? It's this one. So fleas, insects, top there at the end, they must be in the largest number. I have big food web here, and they say which pyramid of number is based on this food web. So, tree. How big is a tree? Tree tends to be bigger than snails and caterpillars. So for that reason, the second block has to be large in my pyramid. Once again, in any pyramid of number, the larger block is for the smaller animals. And mine here, they're like insects. So I need to find somewhere like A or B are the correct options, which have larger second block here. Okay? Then I have ladybirds, so maybe still large, thrushes, hedgehogs. But then the top one I have is a group of large mammals things, right? Birds. So this has to be a small block. So I need to start with small and with a smaller block. So that's why I'm going to go for A here. Again, because the top carnivores are larger animals. What about this? It says, which statement explains why the toxin prevents muscle contraction? So there is a toxin that has the same shape of a neurotransmitter, and it prevents muscle contraction. So just think of it that way. You have some toxin. This toxin is that green thing I have here. Has been in, when it gets to the body, it has exactly the same shape as the neurotransmitter here. So that's the neurotransmitter. That's the poison. And it competes with it. It goes faster and binds to the receptor. So the muscle doesn't contract anymore. So let's check the options, see what do they want. They said the toxin blocks the binding of neurotransmitter to the receptor. The toxin increases the release of neurotransmitter. The toxin increases the release of neurotransmitter from sensory. The toxin stimulates impulses in motor neurons. So which one would make most sense to you? Again, they said here, prevents muscle contraction. So the poison here makes the animal or the human paralyzes. So I can't be picking options where I'm expecting like more contraction, like motor here, right? Increase. Yeah, so it's the first one. It basically blocks and prevents any movement. Now the last two questions. This one has been asked quite often in recent years. They're showing me respiration, photosynthesis in plants, and they want me to pick the correct graph. So let's first check the photosynthesis. When in the day you would expect rate of photosynthesis to be the highest? Night or day? It's gonna have to be during daytime, right? Near midday. So I really need the photosynthesis graph to be either A or B or D. What about respiration? When do you expect respiration to be high or low? I'll tell you respiration is one of those Mrs. Gren characteristics, which you'd expect to occur 24/7, right? So respiration never stops. So that's, I want to show here in A that respiration is nearly the same throughout the day, because no respiration, it dies, okay? And the last question of the day is about the menstrual cycle hormones. Once again, every time I tell you, remember those hormones in their order so you can match the hormone with its position in this cycle. So they want me to find FSH. FSH is the first hormone in the cycle. So I really want to find the curve where it rises first. So which hormone is the first to increase in this cycle? Check. This is LH. Do you know how I know it's LH? LH because it's peaking, the highest concentration of it is like during the ovulation. And this is progesterone here because it's the last to peak. So which hormones peaked first? It's this one, you see? Like first the cycle, the only hormone that increases is this one here. Just happens to be B. Okay? So once again, in the menstrual cycle, the curve is very easy. So FSH. Then you will follow it with O in fall. It's estrogen. And then comes third hormone is going to be peak halfway in this cycle. That's LH. And the last hormone to peak is progesterone. And if she's getting pregnant, it stays high. If she doesn't get pregnant, it will drop afterwards. Okay? This means we're done for today. Tell me if you have questions. If you don't have questions, I'll see you again next week. Okay?